हेलो दोस्तों, आप सभी का स्वागत है मेरे इस यूट्यूब चैनल स्टडी एंड एंटरटेनमेंट क्लब में। आज हम करेंगे चैप्टर नंबर 2 नेशनलिज्म इन इंडिया का पार्ट 7 3.2 टॉपिक हाउ पार्टिसिपेंट्स सॉ द मूवमेंट। Let us now look at different social groups that participated in the civil disobedience movement. Why did they join the movement? What were their ideals? What did Swaraj mean to them? In the countryside, rich peasant communities like the Patidars of Gujarat and Jats of Uttar Pradesh were active in the movement. Being producers of commercial crops, they were very hard hit by the trade depression and falling prices. As their cash income disappeared, they found it impossible to pay their government's revenue demand, and the refusal of the government to reduce the revenue demand led to widespread resentment. These rich peasants became enthusiastic supporters of civil disobedience movement, organizing their communities and at long forcing reluctant members to participate in the boycott programmes. For them, the fight for Swaraj was a struggle against high revenues. But they were deeply disappointed when the movement was called off in 1931 without the revenue rates being revised. So, when the movement was restarted in 1932, many of them refused to participate. The poorer peasantry were not just interested in the lowering of the revenue demand. Many of them were small tenants cultivating land. They had rented from landlords as the depression continued and cash incomes dwindled. The small tenants found it difficult to pay their rent. They wanted the unpaid rent to the landlord to be remitted. They joined a variety of radical movements, often led by socialists and communists. Apprehensive of raising issues that might upset the rich peasant and landlords, the Congress was unwilling to support no rent campaigns in most places. So the relationship between the poor peasant and the Congress remained uncertain. What about the business classes? How did they relate to civil disobedience movement? During the First World War, Indian merchants and industrialists had made huge profits and became powerful. Keen on expanding their business, they now reacted against colonial policies that restricted business activities. They wanted protection against imports of foreign goods and a rupee sterling foreign exchange ratio that would discourage imports. To organize business interest, they formed the Indian Industrial and Commercial Congress in 1920 and the Federation of Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industries FICCI in 1927. One mark question. Led by prominent industrialists like Purushottam Das, Thakur Das, and G.D. Birla, and the industrialists attacked colonial control over the Indian economy and supported the civil disobedience movement when it was first launched. They gave financial assistance and refused to buy or sell imported goods. Most businessmen came to see Swaraj as a time when colonial restrictions on business would no longer exist and trade and industry would flourish without constraints. But after the failure of the Roundtable Conference, business groups were no longer uniformly enthusiastic. They were apprehensive of the spread of militant activities and worried about prolonged disruption of business, as well as of the growing influence of socialism amongst the younger members of the Congress. The industrial working classes did not participate in the civil disobedience movement in large numbers, except in the Nagpur region. As the industrialists came closer to the Congress, workers stayed aloof. But in spite of that, some workers did participate in the civil disobedience movement, selectively adopting some of the ideas of the Gandhian programme, like boycott of foreign goods, as part of their own movements against low wages and poor working conditions. There were strikes by railway workers in 1930 and dock workers in 1932. In 1930, thousands of workers in the Chota Nagpur tin mines wore Gandhian caps and participated in the protest rallies and boycott campaigns. But the Congress was reluctant to include workers' demand as part of its programme of struggle. It felt that this would alienate industrialists and divide the anti imperial forces. Another important feature of the civil disobedience movement was the large-scale participation of women. During Gandhiji's Salt March, thousands of women came out of their homes to listen to him. They participated in the protest marches, manufactured salt, and picketed foreign cloth and liquor shops. Many went to jail. In urban areas, these women were from high caste families. In rural areas, they came from rich peasant households. Moved by Gandhiji's call, they began to see service to the nation as a sacred duty of women. Yet, this increased public role did not unnecessarily mean any radical change in the way the position of women was visualized. Gandhiji was convinced that it was the duty of women to look after home and hearth, be good mothers and good wives. And for a long time, the Congress was reluctant to allow women to hold any position of authority within the organization. It was keen only on their symbolic presence.
women इन सब के बारे में हमें पढ़ना है. तो देखो बच्चा, peasants जो होते हैं ना इंडिया में दो तरीके के होते हैं. Some people are rich peasants, some people are poor peasants. Let's talk about rich people. Before I talk about if they participated in CDM or not, इससे पहले कि मैं बताऊं वो CDM में हिस्सा लिया उन्होंने कि नहीं, मैं आपको एक लाइफ का रूल बताना चाहती हूँ. I want to tell you a life rule. The life rule is that you protest or you participate in a movement when you believe in it, when you believe that the movement is going to solve something for you. आप movement में participate तब करते हो जब आपको लगता है कि ये movement आपको कोई फायदा देने वाली है. So basic concept अगर आपको पता चल रहा है ना, if you understand this much of concept, your job is done. पूरा chapter easy peasy lemon squeezy हो जाएगा. I'll tell you what. Rich peasants like Patidas of Gujarat या Jats of Uttar Pradesh, हमारे इंडिया में कई communities हैं peasants की जो बहुत rich हैं. ये जो peasants थे ना बच्चा पार्टी, they were hard hit by the depression, great economic depression that was going on. They were suffering with a lot of loss. अब क्या चाहिए? They are suffering with the loss. They are suffering with falling prices. What would they need? They will need a freedom from high revenues. जब पैसे नहीं है उनके पास तो obviously they will need freedom from the high revenue. This was the agenda of the farmers. और इसी agenda के साथ they were supporting CDM movement, right? But what about the poor people? Jats of Uttar Pradesh and all are fine. Rich peasants were supporting CDM. They were little reluctant also because the last time civil disobedience movement थोड़ा सा fail हो गया था. थोड़ा बहुत doubt था, लेकिन overall rich peasants were supporting CDM. ठीक है? Point noted? Yes or no? Tell me in the live chat. समझ आया? लिए आपका नाम कितनी बार? तो समझ आ गया ना इतना? तो rich peasants were supporting CDM, but what about the poor peasants? देखो आप, poor peasants की लड़ाई Britishers से नहीं थी. Poor peasants were not concerned with Britishers because they were tortured more by the Indian rich people. Can you imagine? हमारे खुद के देश वाले उनको तंग करते थे. वो ब्रिटिशर्स से क्या लड़ना जाएंगे ना? वो क्या सीडीएम में पार्टिसिपेट करेंगे अगेंस्ट द कॉलोनियल रूल? They were tortured by Indian rich people. तो छोटे लोगों की, छोटे फार्मर्स की लड़ाई जो है वो बड़े पीजेंट्स से ज्यादा थी, ब्रिटिशर्स से कम. They were more interested in fighting the rich peasants than they were in fighting with the colonial government. छोटे फार्मर्स को क्या चाहिए था? उनको चाहिए था कि हमारा रेंट खत्म कर दो. You will be like, ma'am, what kind of rent? I'll tell you. तो rich peasants क्या होते थे ना, उनके पास इतना सारा लैंड होता था. Rich peasants will have so much of land that some of the land they will rent to a small peasant जिसके पास खुद का लैंड नहीं है. कुछ जो लैंड है ना वो आपका लेंड कर देते थे वो छोटे पीजेंट्स को कि चलो भाई तू मुझे किराया देता रहे, यू पे मी द रेंट एंड यू प्रोड्यूस ऑन माय लैंड, राइट? सो दैट रेंट स्मॉल पीजेंट्स वांटेड टू बी अबॉलिश्ड. वो चाहते थे कि यार हम वैसे ही हमारे पास पैसे नहीं है, वैसे ही हम स्ट्रगल कर रहे हैं जीने के लिए, अपने फेलो इंडियंस हमसे ले रहे हैं रेंट. चमका कि नहीं चमका? मंजरी, नीलम, small peasants wanted no rent campaign, but Congress के पास अब dilemma था. Congress was in dilemma बच्चा. Congress was like, who should I support? Rich peasants or small peasants? Rich peasants के पास थे resources, घर में बैठने की जगह है, मीटिंग कर लो वहां पे, right? खाना खिलाने की जगह है, मतलब अगर आप मीटिंग कर रहे हो कांग्रेस के लीडर्स तो आपको खाना प्रोवाइड कर सकते हैं. पूरी amenities थी rich peasants के पास, right? Rich peasants मूवमेंट को फंड भी कर देते थे कभी कभी. So Congress was in a dilemma that should they support large farmers or should they support poor farmers? So कांग्रेस चोज वाइजली, कांग्रेस ने क्या किया, रिच पीजेंट्स को सपोर्ट किया, स्मॉल पीजेंट्स का जो नो रेंट का कैंपेन था उसको सपोर्ट नहीं किया, बिकॉज कांग्रेस न्यू Congress is going to support the small farmers, rich peasants are going to be upset, और जिनके पास resources है उन्हें कभी गुस्सा नहीं दिलाते, right? So Congress had to take a call there. ठीक है, तो फिर से बता रही हूँ, rich peasants participated in the CDM, small peasants could not participate in the CDM. चमक नहीं, अभी तो चमक गया होगा। की बात करते हैं, let's talk about industrialists now. Industrialists जो है ना, मतलब कि कैपिटलिस्ट लोग, फैक्ट्री के ओनर, इंडस्ट्री के ओनर, उनकी बात करते हैं। तो क्या हुआ था ना, हम एक चैप्टर में पढ़ेंगे मेकिंग ऑफ द ग्लोबल वर्ल्ड में, कि जब वर्ल्ड वॉर नंबर 1 थी, when वर्ल्ड वॉर नंबर 1 was going on, industrialists had earned a lot of profit. एज ऑफ इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन में भी ये टॉपिक है। जब वर्ल्ड वॉर नंबर 1 हो रही थी ना, तो सारे देश जो हैं, ये all the countries of the world were busy fighting and Indian industrialists got a profit, क्योंकि अब इंडिया जो है फाइट तो कर नहीं रहा था, we were not directly involved in the world war number 1, but we were providing commodities for the world war number 1, जैसे कि गुनी बैग्स, जैसे कि जूट बैग्स, bottle caps, all of that was provided by India and industrialists were having a lots of profit. But जैसे ही वर्ल्ड वॉर नंबर 1 खत्म हुआ, as soon as the world war number 1 was over, क्या कर दिया था, colonial government ने फिर से हमारी ट्रेड पे रेस्ट्रिक्शन लगा दिया था. Colonial government had put a restriction on our trade, right? जो सारे देश वर्ल्ड वॉर नंबर 1 में लड़ने में बिजी थे ना, all the countries who were busy fighting in the world war number 1, now after the war was over, those countries wanted to increase their profit. खूब चमका की नहीं, समक्षा रहे थे बच्चा पार्टी है कि नहीं, वाशु तिया, हेलो। प्रॉफिट इंक्रीज करने के लिए इंपोर्ट भेजते थे इंडिया में। अब बहुत सारा सामान प्रोड्यूस करते थे, फॉर एग्जांपल रिटेल विल प्रोड्यूस अ लॉट ऑफ थिंग्स एंड दे विल इंपोर्ट टू इंडिया. It could be a shirt, it could be a trouser, it could be fancy fruits, it could be anything. So India में आ रहा था import. Import is something that comes to your country from other countries. So now Indian industrialists, right after the World War number 1, जैसे ही World War number 1 खत्म हुई, Indian industrialists का सपना चकनाचूर हो गया. In fact, बाकी के देशों से सामान आने लग गया इंडिया में. Right? For example, I am making a shirt. ठीक है? अभी मैंने पूरी मार्केट कैप्चर करके, I have captured the entire market of India. Now suddenly a lot of companies of the world are sending their shirt to India. बहुत सारी कंपनीज अपनी अपनी शर्ट्स बना के इंडिया में भेज रही हैं. क्या होगा, मेरी टारगेट ऑडियंस जो है वो कम हो जाएगी, मेरा मार्केट जो है कम हो जाएगा. Same thing happened in the case of Indian industrialists. Now they were worried कि उनका भैया दुकान हो जाएगी चौपट. So to safeguard their rights, to safeguard themselves from the imports, उन्होंने फटाफट दो ऑर्गेनाइजेशन बना दी. समझ आ रहा है कि नहीं, शोमजीत, तस्निया, फटाफटी में बना दी. वन ऑर्गेनाइजेशन वाज इंडियन इंडस्ट्रियल एंड कमर्शियल कांग्रेस 1920. एक ये बना दी. दूसरी बनाई फेडरेशन ऑफ इंडियन चेंबर ऑफ कॉमर्स एंड इंडस्ट्री. बच्चा पार्टी, आई नो दीज आर टफ नेम्स बट वी हैव टू लर्न दिस बिकॉज़ दिस चैप्टर इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. तो डेट भी याद करना पड़ेगा अपन को और अपन को नाम भी याद करना. ठीक है, चलो. तो जो ऑल द बिग इंडस्ट्रियलिस्ट लाइक बिरला साहब, ठाकुरदास साहब, बिरला, ये जो बड़े बड़े इंडस्ट्रियलिस्ट थे ना इंडिया के, इनकी लीडरशिप में, इन देयर लीडरशिप नाउ ऑल द बिजनेसमैन, ऑल द इंडस्ट्रियलिस्ट ऑफ द इंडिया वर सपोर्टिंग सीडीएम. ये बात हमको याद करनी है, दैट इंडस्ट्रियलिस्ट वर सपोर्टिंग द सीडीएम, सपोर्टिंग द सिविल डिसोबीडियंस मूवमेंट, राइट. लेकिन डर तो इनको भी लग रहा था, बच्चा पार्टी, डर तो इनको भी लग रहा था. इनको लग रहा था अगर सीडीएम सक्सेसफुल हो गई तब तो अपने व्यारे न्यारे हो जाएंगे, बट इफ सीडीएम इज अनसक्सेसफुल तब बड़ी पिटाई लग सकती है. तो दे वर अफ्रेड ऑफ मिलिटेंट एक्टिविटीज, दे वर अफ्रेड ऑफ कि बिजनेस प्रॉपर्टी हो सकता है, दैट बिजनेस कैन बी डिसरप्टेड आल्सो. अगर आप प्रोटेस्ट वगैरह कर रहे हो, स्ट्राइक वगैरह कर रहे हो, देन हु विल कम टू बाय योर प्रोडक्ट्स, नो. तो बिजनेस चौपट भी हो सकता है. दे वर आल्सो वेरी स्कैर्ड ऑफ सोशलिज्म. क्लास 9th में पढ़ा है ना, सोशलिज्म इन यूरोप. वो सोशलिज्म यूरोप से फैलता इंडिया की गलियों तक भी आ गया था. So now businessmen were very scared of socialism also, the unity in workers also. तो डर तो लग रहा था, लेकिन फिर भी सीडीएम को सपोर्ट जरूर कर रहे थे. इनफैक्ट फंड भी कर रहे थे. Whatever financial assistance was needed in, you know, एक सेकेंड, वो फाइनेंशियल असिस्टेंस भी आ रहा था आपका इंडस्ट्रियलिस्ट की तरफ से. चलो, बहुत बोलिया मैंने, अब मैं थक गई थोड़ा सा. नाउ वील डू अ क्विज क्वेश्चन.
The answer of this question is 1920. B option 1920. You can see here Indian Chamber of Commerce and Industries. No, sorry. Indian Industrial Commercial Congress in 1920.
The session is over. You have to tell me. देखो workers की बात करते हैं. अब वही है भाई, अमीर गरीब का फर्क है. When rich peasants were participating in CDM, poor peasants were not. So when industrialists were participating, industrial workers were not. ये आपस में लड़ाई है ना, right? Industrial workers were not participating in the CDM movement. Congress was also not supporting industrial. फंडा वही है अभी भी, that if industrial workers were supported, so industrialist लोग upset हो जाते, right? तो हमें चूज करना पड़ा. कांग्रेस had to choose between the businessmen or the workers, and Congress went ahead with the businessmen. क्यों भाई? पैसा बोलता है भैया, है ना? पैसा बोलता है, उसी पैसे की वजह से तो मूवमेंट आगे जा रही थी. तो we had no other choice, the Congress had no other choice but to support the industrialist. है कि नहीं? अब आप बोलोगे मैम ऐसा कैसे हो सकता? How can it happen that the entire country, the workers of the entire country were not participating in the movement? नहीं, ऐसा सही में नहीं है. There were some places where workers were still participating in the movement. For example, नागपुर में workers ने बोला हमें नहीं पता बाकी लोग क्या करें. We are going to support our गांधी जी. In fact, 1930 में रेलवे वर्कर्स ने स्ट्राइक की. 1932 में डॉक वर्कर्स ने स्ट्राइक की. बोलोगे मैम डॉक वर्कर्स क्या होता है? शिप से रिलेटेड, ठीक है. और छोटा नागपुर टिन माइंस के वर्कर्स ने गांधी कैप पहन के हजारों की संख्या में प्रोटेस्ट निकाल लिया. So there were few workers who were still participating in the CDM, but overall if you see, workers were not participating in CDM. इसलिए बता रही हूँ, rich peasants participated, poor peasants did not. Industrialists participated, industrial workers did not. ठीक है भाई, आगे चलते हैं. Women की बात करते हैं. My favorite topic. कृतिका, गोविंद, विकास. Women in civil disobedience movement. भाई औरतों के साथ तो बहुत बुरा होता था. फ्रेंच रेवोल्यूशन उठा के देख लो. You pick French Revolution, very bad. You pick what do you call it? October Revolution of Russia, very bad. You pick Indian freedom struggle, very bad. So women were participating in CDM. They were participating in picketing. They were participating in boycotting stuff. They were participating in even salt march. हर जगह औरतें participate कर रही थी. बड़े घर की औरतें थी. In cities, they were from the richer section of the society. In villages, they were from the higher caste society. अब बोलोगे मैम ऐसा क्यों? बच्चा because इन्हीं तक awareness पहुंची. Only women from privileged section of the society were aware about the movement. तो वो लोग बहुत participate कर रहे थे. Even some of the women even went to jail. कुछ औरतें तो जेल भी गई आदमियों की तरह. लेकिन their effort were not very counted. गांधी जी बोलते थे कि हाँ very nice, you guys are participating, very nice, it's your duty towards your country. But Gandhi ji also used to believe that औरतों को घर में रहना. Gandhi ji used to believe that women should have the duty to take care of the household. Regressive, no, even I think that. Anyway, और कांग्रेस पार्टी की बात करते हैं. Congress was reluctant to allow women to hold any position of authority. कांग्रेस बोलती थी कि if you want to be a part of the movement, very nice, but only be a symbolic part. मतलब बस बैठे रहो शोपीस बन के. बहुत ज्यादा अथॉरिटी और पावर मत मांगो क्योंकि हम नहीं देंगे. Congress was reluctant to give power and authority to women. Bacha, this is what patriarchy looks like. It has been, engulfing our country since ages, and this is the testimony of it. Okay? So this question can come. What was the role of women in civil disobedience movement? You have to write all of these 4 or 5 points that I have told. Okay? Chalo. Quiz question say hi Maya, hi Red Mine. Hi,
In which of the following cities workers participated in CDM? Answer is A. Nagpur. 3.3 The limits of civil disobedience. Not all social groups were moved by the abstract concept of Swaraj. One such group was the nation's untouchables, who from around the 1930s had begun to call themselves Dalit or oppressed. For long, the Congress had ignored the Dalits for fear of offending the Sanatanis, the conservative high caste Hindus. But Mahatma Gandhi declared that Swaraj would not come for 100 years if untouchability was not eliminated. He called the untouchables Harijans, or the children of God, organized satyagraha to secure them entry into temples and access to public wells, tanks, roads, and schools. He himself cleaned toilets to dignify the work of Bhangi, the sweepers, and persuaded upper caste to change their heart and give up the sin of untouchability. But many Dalit leaders were keen on a different political solution to the problems of community. They began organizing themselves, demanding reserved seats in the educational institution and a separate electorate that would choose Dalit members for legislative councils. Political empowerment, they believed, would resolve the problems of their social disabilities. Dalit participation in the civil disobedience movement was therefore limited, particularly in the Maharashtra and Nagpur region, where the organization was quite strong. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who organized the Dalits into the Depressed Class Association in 1930, clashed with Mahatma Gandhi at the Second Round Table Conference by demanding separate electorates for Dalits. When the British government conceded Ambedkar's demand, Gandhiji began a fast unto death. He believed that separate electorates for Dalit would slow down the process of their integration into society. Ambedkar ultimately accepted Gandhiji's position, and the result was the Pune Pact of September 1932. It gave the depressed class, later to be known as scheduled caste, reserved seats in provincial and central legislative councils, but they were to be voted in by the general electorate. The Dalit movement, however, continued to be apprehensive of the Congress-led national movement. Some of the Muslim political organizations in India were also lukewarm in their response to civil disobedience movement. After the decline of the non-cooperation Khilafat movement, a large section of Muslims felt alienated from the Congress. From the mid-1920s, the Congress came to be more visibly associated with openly Hindu religions, nationalist groups like the Hindu Mahasabha. As the relation between Hindus and Muslims worsened, each community organized religious processions with militant fervor, provoking Hindu-Muslim communal clashes and riots in various cities. Every riot deepened the distance between the two communities. The Congress and the Muslim made efforts to renegotiate an alliance, and in 1927 it appeared that such a unity could be forged. The important differences were over the question of representation in the future assemblies that were to be elected. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, one of the leaders of Muslim League, was unwilling to give up demand for separate electorates. If Muslims were assured reserved seats in the Central Assembly and representation in the proportion to population in the Muslim dominated provinces Bengal and Punjab. Negotiations were over, the question of representation continued, but all hope of resolving the issue at the All Parties Conference in 1928 disappeared when M.R. Jayakar of the Hindu Mahasabha strongly opposed efforts at compromise. When the civil disobedience movement started, there was thus an atmosphere of suspicion and distrust between communities. Alienated from the Congress, large section of Muslims could not respond to the call for a united struggle. Many Muslim leaders and intellectuals expressed their concern about the status of Muslim as a minority within India. They feared that the culture and identity of minorities would be submerged under the domination of Hindu majority.
लिमिटेशन ऑफ सिविल डिसोबीडियंस मूवमेंट। बोलोगे मैम जब इतनी जोर शोर से गांधी जी बार बार सीडीएम लॉन्च कर रहे थे तो फिर सीडीएम सक्सेसफुल क्यों नहीं हुई? मैं बता टू मेक श्योर दैट द मूवमेंट इज सक्सेसफुल यू नीड मास पार्टिसिपेशन। अब सीडीएम को पार्टिसिपेशन तो मिल रहा था बट स्टिल सम ऑफ द सेक्शंस ऑफ द सोसाइटी वर नॉट पार्टिसिपेटिंग इन द सीडीएम। फॉर एग्जांपल दलित सेक्शन ऑफ द सोसाइटी, फॉर एग्जांपल मुस्लिम कम्युनिटी ऑफ इंडिया, राइट? तो ये दो तीन तरीके की कम्युनिटी सीडीएम में पार्ट नहीं ले रही थी। नाउ यू विल बी लाइक मैम व्हाई वर दे नॉट डूइंग इट? इट वाज सो इंपॉर्टेंट फॉर आवर कंट्री। Yeah, but they also had valid reasons. Both Muslims and Dalit people had valid reasons to not participate in the CDM. चलो पहले दलित लोगों की बात करते हैं। तो कांग्रेस was all about elite Hindus, high caste Hindus. बोलोगे मैम ऐसा क्यों? क्योंकि बच्चा हाई कास्ट एंड हाई क्लास हिंदूज ओनली हैड मीडियम टू बी अ पार्ट ऑफ मूवमेंट बैक देन। बाकी लोग तो अपना सर्वाइवल करने में ही बिजी रहते थे, राइट? सो कांग्रेस वाज फुल ऑफ सनातनीज। सनातनीज मींस हाई कास्ट कंजर्वेटिव हिंदू। कांग्रेस में थे ही सनातनीज। अब ऑब्वियसली वी ऑलवेज नो दैट इन अ कास्ट casteist society, high caste Hindus despise the lower caste Hindus. ये बहुत ही बड़ा फ्लॉ है हमारी सोसाइटी का, राइट? So for the same reason, Dalit people were not participating in the CDM because CDM तो कौन आगे ले जा रहा था? कांग्रेस ले जा रही थी, और कांग्रेस किसको फेवर करती थी? हाई कास्ट कंजर्वेटिव हिंदू सनातनीज को फेवर करती थी। बट गांधी जी नहीं करते थे ऐसा। गांधी जी वर ऑल अबाउट इंक्लूसिविटी। गांधी जी वाज ऑल अबाउट कि सबको साथ लेके चलना चाहिए। इनफैक्ट गांधी जी तो दलित लोगों को हरिजन बोलते थे, चिल्ड्रन ऑफ गॉड। कैन यू बिलीव इट? सो क्यूट, राइट? गांधी जी सत्याग्रह करते थे। गांधी जी would organize so many satyagrahs to make sure that Dalit people also get entry in the public spaces कि उनके साथ कुछ गलत ना हो। और गांधी जी मानते थे that if we are going to practice छुआछूत, if we are going to practice untouchability, तो हम 100 साल पीछे चले। और ये सच है। If we are going to be biased, if we are going to be unjust in our actions to any community, and especially Dalit people, then definitely we can never be progressive as a society. और इसी को गांधी जी बोलते थे sin of untouchability. That untouchability is a sin. Untouchability एक पाप है, right? चलो अभी हम सबसे इम्पोर्टेंट क्वेश्चन करेंगे। अच्छा प्रशांत की बात करते हैं। Now, B.R. Ambedkar, who was a Dalit himself, he was also the leader of the Dalit people. He made an organization. उन्होंने एक बढ़िया सी organization बनाई, Depressed Classes Association. इस organization में इंडिया के बहुत सारे दलित लोग पार्ट थे। And B.R. Ambedkar क्या चाहते थे? B.R. Ambedkar चाहते थे that even Dalit people should get political empowerment. Very great point. Very great, ideology. वो चाहते थे कि दलित लोगों को भी पॉलिटिकल फ्रीडम मिले, पॉलिटिकल एम्पावरमेंट मिले, राइट? सो दे वर आस्किंग फॉर B.R. Ambedkar and all the Dalit leaders together were asking for a separate electorate for Dalit people. Separate electorate का मतलब कि ऐसी हम places define कर दे, we should define such constituencies in which Dalit people take part in the election, right? तो separate electorate मिल जाए हमें, right? लेकिन गांधी जी को लगता था, गांधी जी बिलीव कि इससे जो है सोसाइटी खंडित हो जाएगी, that with this society might get disintegrated, right? उनका मानना भी ठीक था, गांधी जी का मानना भी ठीक था। अभी इंडिपेंडेंस मिली नहीं थी, अगर सेपरेट इलेक्टोरेट सबको दे देते शायद सही में सोसाइटी डिवाइड हो जाती। तो गांधी जी बिलीव दैट अंबेडकर शुड नॉट आस्क फॉर इट एंड गांधी जी स्टैट फॉर अ फास्ट अनटू दैट। सोचो जरा, इतनी बुढ़ी उम्र में, इतने एजड एज में गांधी जी ने बोला खाना ही नहीं खाऊंगा, पानी ही नहीं पीऊंगा जब तक मेरी बात नहीं मानोगे। आई एम नॉट गोना ईट और ड्रिंक एनीथिंग अनलेस अंबेडकर अबाइड्स बाय व्हाट आई एम सेइंग। ये गांधी जी अब इस पर अड़ चुके थे। और फिर क्या हुआ? अंबेडकर जी इतना प्यार करते थे गांधी जी से। B.R. Ambedkar used to love गांधी जी so much, बच्चा पार्टी, that B.R. Ambedkar गांधी जी ओके ठीक है भाई, जो आप बोलो वही सही है। और गांधी जी ने भी बहुत बात मानी अंबेडकर जी की। गांधी जी said, अंबेडकर, I can't give you a separate electorate for Dalit people, but I can promise you, अच्छा पार्टी गौर फरमाइए, I can promise you when India will be independent, जब भारत आजाद होगा, we will make sure that Dalit section of the society has reserved seats. क्योंकि गांधी जी वादा करके गए थे अंबेडकर जी से कि दलित लोगों को रिजर्वेशन मैं दिलाऊंगा अंबेडकर, क्योंकि तुम्हारी बात बिल्कुल सही है, दलित पीपल शुड हैव पॉलिटिकल एम्पावरमेंट, राइट? एंड दिस कॉन्वर्सेशन, दिस पैक्ट इज नोन एज पूना पैक्ट. The Pune Pact of 1932 happened between B.R. Ambedkar and Gandhi ji upon Dalit political empowerment. B.R. Ambedkar की बात, एक मिडिल ग्राउंड आ गया, अंबेडकर जी की भी बात मान ली गई, गांधी जी की भी बात मान ली गई, और बड़ी ब्यूटीफुली दलित लोगों को इंटीग्रेट करने की कोशिश, राइट? आई नो थोड़ा सा डाउट फिर भी था दलित सेक्शन ऑफ द सोसाइटी के दिलो दिमाग में।
तो आज का सेशन हम यही स्टॉप करेंगे, बाकी इसके बाद का हम नेक्स्ट वीडियो में कंटिन्यू करेंगे। अगर आपको वीडियो अच्छा लगा है तो प्लीज़ लाइक कीजिए, शेयर कीजिए और सब्सक्राइब कीजिए। धन्यवाद।